Imagine men who could level an opponent with a single move and calmly finish the take. Hollywood's most rugged stars weren't merely pretending to be heroes, fighters, and warriors. They were living it. Offset their days burst with as much danger and drama as any script. These real men injected authentic grit into every frame, and today we expose the shocking truth behind the 10 toughest actors in cinema history. Legends whose real-world courage, strength, and resilience forged unforgettable performances. Audie Murphy. When people talk about Hollywood's toughest legends, names like John Wayne and Clint Eastwood come to mind. But none of them come close to the quiet intensity of Audie Murphy, a babyface 5'5" actor who looked more like a choir boy than a battlefield hero. Directors didn't know what to do with him. His youthful looks made him a strange fit for the gritty action roles he was destined to play. What they didn't know was that Murphy wasn't just playing a war hero, he was one. Before stepping into the limelight, he was already a legend on the battlefield. At just 19 years old, Murphy held off an entire company of enemy soldiers in France, alone, wounded and nearly out of ammo. Then, against all odds, he led a counterattack. That act earned him the Medal of Honor, the highest military distinction in the United States, but that was only the beginning. By the time he was 21, Murphy had racked up 28 military medals, becoming the most decorated American soldier of World War II. He took out tanks, charged enemy strongholds by himself, and kept fighting even after being hit multiple times. His real-life record makes most Hollywood scandals look like cheap fiction. Hollywood first took notice of Audie Murphy after his heroic face appeared on the cover of Life magazine. But when he walked through the gates of a major studio, security guards refused to let him in. He looked too young, too harmless to be the battle-hardened legend everyone had heard about. No one believed this soft-spoken, baby-faced man could be that war hero. Yet behind that boyish grin was someone far more dangerous than any action star on screen. Military historians estimate Murphy took down as many as 300 enemy combatants single-handedly. That's more than some entire battalions, but when Hollywood tried to bring his story to the big screen, they ran into an unexpected problem. The truth was too extreme to be believable. Into Hell and Back, Murphy played himself in one of the most surreal moments in cinema history. But even then, producers had to cut out parts of his real-life story. Director Jesse Hibbs admitted, "We had to leave out some of Audie's actual feats because no one would have believed them. It was a moment where reality outpaced fiction and became a forgotten chapter in Hollywood scandals." After the war, Audie Murphy fought a new enemy, relentless PTSD. He slept with a pistol tucked under his pillow and often snapped awake, drenched in sweat, hand already on the grip. His second wife, Wanda Hendricks, captured the contrast best. Audie had two completely different sides. In public, he was shy, soft-spoken, and gentle. But I've seen him wake up from nightmares and become someone I didn't recognize. A hardened killer with instincts that frightened me. Murphy kept those instincts caged throughout his Hollywood years. They broke cover only once, during a fiery dispute with a businessman. Witnesses say he moved so fast, so decisively, that the man later confessed, "I suddenly realized I was looking into the eyes of someone who could kill me without hesitation. It was the most terrifying moment of my life." Yet Murphy never chased the tough guy role. He favored light comedies and romances, scripts that let him step away from a violent past few could fathom. Behind that quiet smile lived a decorated veteran whose real-world combat record dwarfed any fictional hero, a living legend whispered about in Hollywood gossip. Number 4 on our list is truly jaw-dropping, not just because of his real-life toughness, but because studio executives went to great lengths to hide his past. Why? They feared the truth was too wild for audiences to believe. But before we uncover this incredible piece of Hollywood history, let us know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments below. Charles Bronson. Before he ever drew a gun on screen, Charles Bronson was already fighting for his life, not in a movie, but in the brutal shadows of a Pennsylvania coal mine. Born Charles Buczynski, he was the 11th of 15 children, raised in crushing poverty, where dreams were luxuries no one could afford. By age 10, while most boys played outside, Bronson was hundreds of feet below ground, hauling coal in choking darkness just to keep his family fed. That suffocating childhood sculpted the man the world would one day call a legend. He didn't speak often about those years, but when he did, his words hit like a sledgehammer. I was raised in violent neighborhoods and saw killing firsthand. We lived with death, starvation, and misery. The trademark scowl, the steel-eyed glare, the weather-beaten face, they weren't crafted in a studio. They were real, worn into his skin by the cold grip of poverty, by fists thrown in back alleys, and by the silence of hunger. But Charles Bronson's real crucible came not on set, but in the sky. During World War II, he served as a B-29 aerial gunner, flying straight into danger across 25 combat missions over Japan. It wasn't just duty, it was survival. He took enemy fire, earned a Purple Heart, and kept his composure through chaos that would have broken lesser men. Fellow soldiers recalled his chilling calm under pressure, the kind of man you'd want beside you when everything goes wrong. Yet when the war ended, his battle continued, this time against obscurity. Bronson clawed his way up through over 50 gritty jobs: onion picker, short-order cook, even stepping into the ring as a pro boxer. Hollywood wasn't waiting for him. When he finally landed roles, he was typecast, not for who he was, but for how he looked. His steely glare and rough exterior made him the go-to for gangsters, henchmen, and hardened roles, often ones that didn't match his background at all. But Bronson didn't just act tough, he embodied it. Unlike other actors who rehearsed punches, Bronson moved like a man who'd really been in fights. His brawls on screen weren't theatrical, they were precise, unflinching, and real. As film historian Eddie Muller once said, "When Bronson throws a punch on screen, it doesn't look choreographed. It looks like a man who has been in real fights and knows how to hurt someone efficiently." On screen, Charles Bronson was the embodiment of quiet menace, but according to those who worked alongside him, the real man was even more formidable. Despite standing at just 5'9" Bronson carried the raw strength of a man forged by sweat and survival. He didn't just look powerful, he was. Actor Jan Michael Vincent, who co-starred with him in The Mechanic, once recalled a moment that stuck with him forever. During a scene where he was just supposed to grab my shirt, I felt it, the grip. That wasn't acting. That was real strength, earned from a lifetime of hard labor. And if anyone doubted his grit, his reaction to threats from organized crime said it all. After Death Wish made him the face of cinematic vengeance, word spread that real-life underworld figures weren't happy. The studio panicked. They offered security. Bronson waved it off. His answer? Calm, unbothered. "I've lived too long and been through too much to worry about people like that." Director Michael Winner, who knew him well, once put it bluntly, "Charles doesn't act tough. He simply is tough. There's a difference." Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin didn't just act like a tough guy, he was one. Long before Hollywood handed him a script, Marvin had already survived one of the most brutal stages imaginable, the Pacific Front in World War II. As a private first class in the 4th Marine Division, Marvin wasn't playing soldier. He was locked in real combat during the savage Battle of Saipan in 1944. It was there that a spray of machine gun fire tore through his body, shattering his sciatic nerve and leaving him permanently wounded. He spent nearly a year in a hospital bed, and the limp he carried for the rest of his life was no act, just well hidden on screen. For his sacrifice, he was awarded the Purple Heart. Unlike some stars who later polished their stories for the spotlight, Marvin never sugarcoated the truth. When asked about his service, he dropped the glamour and said bluntly, "I was a Marine sniper in the Pacific. I got shot in the ass and sent home." Brutal, honest, and unforgettable, just like his performances. Any man who says he enjoyed combat is either a liar or a fool. Those weren't just words. They were Lee Marvin's truth. And it's that raw honesty that made his screen presence feel so unsettlingly real. He didn't just act out violence, he understood it at its core. Director John Borman, who worked with Marvin on Point Blank, once said, "Lee understood violence in a way most actors never will. That's because Marvin had seen it. Not the stylized kind made for the screen, but the brutal, chaotic kind that left scars you couldn't see. When Marvin moved, when he stared someone down on screen, it wasn't theater, it was memory." In films like The Dirty Dozen and The Killers, Marvin didn't need to pretend. His characters felt bone-chillingly authentic because they were rooted in a past most actors never lived. Fellow co-star James Coburn summed it up best. When Lee walked onto a set, there was an immediate shift in the atmosphere. He didn't just act tough, he was tough, and everyone knew it. But nothing illustrated Marvin's real-life grit quite like the infamous Oregon bar brawl. While filming in the Pacific Northwest, Marvin, in his 40s, got into it with an entire crew of local lumberjacks. Witnesses said he stood his ground like it was a war zone, fending off multiple younger men until the state police stepped in. No cameras, no stunt doubles, just Lee being Lee. Lee Marvin arrived on set the very next morning, bruised, unbowed, and adamant about sticking to the shooting schedule without a hint of medical leave. What set Marvin apart was an unusual mix of brawn and brains. Beneath his rough exterior and tales of barroom brawls lay a thoughtful, well-read actor, deeply invested in his roles. Director Samuel Fuller, who teamed up with Marvin on The Big Red One, noted that Marvin's wartime ordeals had given him a surprisingly reflective view on life. He could be dissecting Ernest Hemingway's prose one moment and the next demonstrating the quickest method to neutralize an adversary. At a time when many action heroes were merely posturing, Marvin's toughness was genuine. A combat-hardened Marine who had stared down life's most harrowing moments, he poured every ounce of that authenticity into his performances. As film critic Roger Ebert famously put it, "When Lee Marvin threatens someone in a movie, you believe it because Lee Marvin could actually carry out that threat." Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen, a name synonymous with effortless cool yet off-camera, he was a true thrill-seeker whose real-life feats often stole the show. While many actors dodged danger with stunt doubles, McQueen craved the adrenaline rush. He'd roar through leaps, jumps, and high-speed chases himself, blurring the line between actor and action hero. Long before the fame, McQueen's life was already a wild ride. Raised in chaos and hardship, he hit the streets at 14, dodging trouble and chasing adrenaline. In 1947, he joined the Marines, but discipline didn't come easy. He racked up 7 demotions and even landed in the brig for disappearing on an unauthorized 2-week adventure. Still, he wasn't all rebellion. During an Arctic drill, he saved 5 fellow Marines after their tank plunged through ice. That act of heroism would be just the beginning. After the military, he drifted through gritty jobs, lumberjack, oil rigger, carnival barker, until acting came along. But Hollywood didn't tame him. It barely kept up. McQueen's obsession with speed and danger never slowed down. He raced motorcycles and cars under fake names just to dodge studio backlash. When filming The Great Escape, he performed nearly all his own stunts except for one infamous motorcycle leap that insurance companies flat out forbade. But make no mistake, his racing credentials weren't for show. At the 1970 12 Hours of Sebring, one of the world's toughest endurance races, McQueen and his co-driver placed second. Even though Steve was racing with a cast on his foot, that's not a storyline, that's real grit. As his stunt double Bud Eakins once said, Steve wasn't playing at being a racer or a tough guy, he was genuinely both. On set, he was a producer's worst nightmare and a director's dream. While filming The Sand Pebbles, he nearly drowned in a raging river because he refused a double. On The Towering Inferno, he ran through real flames most stuntmen refused to touch. Director John Sturges summed it up best. The problem with Steve wasn't getting him to do dangerous stunts. It was stopping him from doing the ones that were truly life-threatening. But perhaps the most haunting chapter came when police warned him he was on Charles Manson's hit list, alongside names like Frank Sinatra. Most stars would retreat behind security teams. McQueen? He started carrying a loaded Magnum, always ready, always alone. Even racing legend Mario Andretti admitted Hollywood had actors pretending to be tough. Steve actually was. He had more guts than some professional drivers I knew. In a world built on image, Steve McQueen's legacy has survived through grit, fire, and a fearless truth rarely found in celebrity interviews. Was Steve McQueen the realest action hero Hollywood ever had? Or just another thrill-chasing rebel? Comment, yes, real deal, if you think his fearlessness was unmatched, or no, just reckless, if you believe he took it too far. Let's see where the real fans stand. Kirk Douglas. Kirk Douglas wasn't born into fame, he clawed his way there from the bottom. Before the red carpets and golden statuettes, he was Isa Danielovich, the gritty son of Jewish immigrants who knew hunger far more intimately than luxury. His childhood was marked by cold nights, empty plates, and a fire in his gut that never went out. As a kid, he scraped together coins by selling snacks to factory workers. It wasn't much, but it taught him two things: hustle and survival. And those traits would become his weapons in a brutal world that didn't hand out second chances. Long before he conquered the big screen, Douglas fought battles of a different kind in the wrestling ring. Not the choreographed theatrics of showbiz, but real, bone-jarring collegiate competition. He was good, so good that his skill on the mat earned him a scholarship to St. Lawrence University, a lifeline out of poverty. Then came World War II. Douglas enlisted in the US Navy and served as a communications officer aboard a submarine chaser, a job few survived unscarred. Life aboard those cramped warships meant constant danger, relentless noise, and the silent fear of what lurked beneath. He was eventually injured in service and discharged in 1944, carrying both physical and emotional wounds. Yet through all of this, the grit remained. In later celebrity interviews, Douglas often downplayed his toughness, but those who knew his past understood. The man behind the smile had faced more storms than Hollywood could ever script. What set him apart from the rest of Hollywood's on-screen warriors wasn't just his muscular build, but the sheer fire in his soul. Director Stanley Kubrick, never one to sugarcoat words, once said Kirk was a force of nature. If Douglas wanted something done, it got done, no debate, no compromise. On the set of Spartacus, he pushed himself to the limit, training with real ex-gladiators and seasoned fighters to make every swing of the sword feel painfully real. He even defied his stunt coordinator and took a brutal fall himself, one that injured him badly. But instead of halting production, Douglas was back on set 2 days later, bruised but unshaken. His co-stars didn't just admire him, they feared him a little. Burt Lancaster, a powerhouse in his own right, once said, "Kirk approaches acting like a physical confrontation. He doesn't just perform a scene, he attacks it." And that wasn't just about acting, that was Douglas's entire life. The real test came years later when the cameras stopped rolling. In 1991, Douglas survived a tragic helicopter crash that claimed lives and shattered his spine. Doctors weren't sure he'd ever walk again, but Douglas, well into his 70s, endured the pain, clawed his way through grueling rehab, and stood tall again. Then came another blow, a stroke in 1996 that robbed him of his speech, and again, he fought back. Years of therapy, relentless determination, and eventually he wrote a book about the journey. Director Howard Hawks summed it up best. There were plenty of actors who looked tough, but Kirk actually was. You could see it in his eyes that man had battled life and refused to back down. While Hollywood gossip often paints toughness with a brush of bravado, Douglas didn't need a spotlight to prove anything. His scars told the story, and his legacy made sure no one would forget it. James Cagney didn't need Hollywood to teach him how to throw a punch. The streets of Manhattan did that long before the cameras rolled. Standing at just 5'5", Cagney may not have looked like a powerhouse, but beneath that small frame was a man who grew up in a world where fists did the talking. On the Lower East Side, survival wasn't scripted, it was earned. Cagney learned to box not for sport, but for protection. He wasn't fighting for trophies. He was fighting to stay on his feet. Long before he ever played a gangster on screen, Cagney had danced with real danger. His fast hands, sharp reflexes, and brutal precision weren't Hollywood choreography. They were born from back-alley brawls and street corner showdowns. When audiences saw him fight on screen, what they didn't realize was that they weren't watching an actor. They were watching a man who'd been there and knew exactly how to end a fight before it even started. Director Raoul Walsh once said, "Jimmy knew how to throw a punch better than any actor I ever worked with because he'd thrown plenty of real ones in his day." That authenticity hit hard, literally. Co-stars like Mae Clarke found out the hard way during scenes where Cagney ditched the fake punches and delivered the real thing. One moment, it was a grapefruit to the face. The next, it was a stunned silence on set. But Cagney wasn't all fire and fists. His background as a dancer gave him a rare edge, the kind of precise footwork and explosive power that made his action scenes electric. He moved with purpose, like a fighter and a performer fused into one. He wasn't just believable, he was unstoppable. Behind the scenes, his reputation was legendary. In Hollywood circles, even comedians knew better than to mess with him. Jimmy was the kind of guy who, if you tried something funny, would drop you where you stood, then help you up and dust you off, Bob Hope once quipped. In one of his rare celebrity interviews, Cagney summed it up best. When you're my size and grow up where I did, you either learn to be handy with your fists or get used to being on the ground. I preferred standing. John Wayne. John Wayne didn't need Hollywood to craft his tough guy image. He brought that grit with him from the start. Long before the cameras rolled, the man known as the Duke was living a life that would break most modern stars. Born Marion Morrison, he was raised in the rugged dust and sweat of early 20th century California and Iowa. Towering at 6'4", Wayne was a force even in his teens, earning a football scholarship to USC not for charm but for sheer strength and power. And when Hollywood came calling, it wasn't with scripts, it was with set pieces. He worked behind the scenes as a prop man, hauling gear that took 3 other men to lift. That raw muscle made him stand out fast. What many don't know, Wayne didn't just act in rough and tumble roles, he lived them. Even into his 50s, he performed his own stunts. During the filming of The Alamo, he took a brutal fall off a horse, cracked his ribs and kept filming. No complaints, just tape, grit and another take. Director John Ford once said, "Duke's toughness isn't an act. I've seen him outwork crews half his age in heat that sent people to the ER." But his most dangerous role may have been off camera. In 1956, Wayne shot The Conqueror in Utah, a location unknowingly exposed to nuclear fallout. Of the 220 people on set, 91 later developed cancer, including Wayne himself. Still, he pressed on, starring in action-heavy films for decades. Even after losing a lung and several ribs in 1964, he stunned everyone by returning to perform stunts in The Sons of Katie Elder just months later. His co-stars were often left speechless. One remembered him tearing his shoulder ligaments mid-scene, only to bandage it during lunch and finish the day like nothing happened. When a director asked if he wanted a stunt double, Wayne growled, "Either I do my own stunts or you get someone else for the part." Wayne's political views stirred plenty of celebrity interviews, debates, and headlines. But even his harshest critics admitted one thing: the man was built different. Actor Kirk Douglas once said, "Disagree with his views all you want, but don't question his toughness." In a world where most action heroes are made in editing rooms, John Wayne was the real deal. Rate John Wayne's real-life toughness from 1 to 9. 1 equals sign pure Hollywood act, 9 equals sign the ultimate symbol of real-world grit. How tough do you think he really was? Drop your number in the comments and don't hold back. Robert Mitchum. Robert Mitchum didn't just play tough guys, he was one. The laid-back glare, the gravel-toned voice, and that quiet intensity weren't manufactured for the screen. They were the aftershocks of a life forged in survival. Before the fame, Mitchum lived on the fringes of society. Orphaned young and swept into the harsh currents of the Great Depression, he spent his teenage years hopping freight trains and drifting from town to town, taking whatever brutal job he could find, digging ditches, shoveling coal, even stepping into the boxing ring under the name Jimmy Mitchum. That wasn't a marketing gimmick. The crooked nose and bruised knuckles, all earned the hard way, but it wasn't just labor or fistfights that carved him into the man audiences would later fear and admire. At just 16, Mitchum landed in a Georgia chain gang after being arrested for vagrancy, a raw and punishing taste of a system most actors could only pretend to understand. That short stint behind bars left a deeper mark than any film role ever could. Directors and co-stars saw it right away. Edward Dmytryk, who directed Crossfire, said it best. Bob never had to prove how tough he was. He simply was. On set, Mitchum could lift co-stars like Shelley Winters effortlessly, take hits without flinching, and move through chaos like it was background noise. His strength wasn't showy, it was just always there. In 1948, when he was arrested over a scandalous incident involving banned substances, many thought it would end his career, but Mitchum didn't flinch. He served his 60-day sentence with the same unshaken cool that defined his characters. Instead of destroying him, the scandal made him even more iconic. While other actors waxed poetic in celebrity interviews about their love for the craft, Mitchum stripped away the illusions. "I have 2 acting styles, with and without a horse," he once deadpanned. It wasn't arrogance, it was honesty. He didn't need to pretend. The edge you saw on camera came from real bruises, real battles, and a lifetime of carrying more than scripts. Joseph von Sternberg once said, "There are actors who create characters and actors who reveal themselves." Mitchum never had to fake a thing. His look, his vibe, that air of danger, it wasn't a role. It was the real man showing through. Anthony Quinn didn't step into Hollywood. He fought his way in with fists, calloused hands, and a past far heavier than any script. Born in war-torn Chihuahua, Mexico, during the chaos of revolution, his childhood opened with the sounds of marching boots and fleeing footsteps. By the time he arrived in the US, survival wasn't an idea. It was a daily routine. Raised in the roughest corners of Los Angeles, young Anthony wasn't lifting dumbbells or chasing fame. He was hauling meat as a butcher's helper, swinging hammers on construction sites, and throwing punches in real boxing rings, all before he turned 18. His rugged build and broken nose weren't cosmetic trademarks. They were earned. Long before camera crews called action, Quinn was living the kind of life most actors only try to imitate. As a teen, he fought professionally to help put food on the table. That experience didn't just give him physical power, it etched a raw truth into his performances. When Quinn stepped into a role, you didn't see a man pretending to struggle. You saw someone who had already survived. On the set of Zorba the Greek, there's a famous moment where Quinn lifts heavy logs on the beach, a task meant for 2 men. No body doubles, no movie magic. Just Quinn, muscles carved by real labor, doing it for real. Even the local Greek workers were stunned. Director Elia Kazan summed it up best. Tony doesn't act tough, he simply is tough. His strength didn't come from stylists or trainers, it came from years of real work, real sweat, and real grit. Even in his 50s and 60s, when most stars relied on stuntmen, Quinn insisted on doing the dangerous stuff himself. During the Guns of Navarone, he scaled a cliff that terrified the crew. He didn't just play strong, he was strong, but what made Quinn different from other screen titans wasn't just brawn. He didn't fear emotion. He could lift a co-star with one arm and then break into a quiet discussion about painting or poetry. This blend of strength and sensitivity gave him a magnetic presence that transcended any one role. Actress Sophia Loren once said, "Anthony had the body of a warrior and the soul of a poet." And when he walked the spotlight-lined paths of red carpet fashion, he carried the same grounded intensity, a man whose past never left him, even under the flash of fame. In his own words, "I've carried real loads, thrown real punches, and felt real hunger. When I portray these men, I'm not pretending, I'm remembering." Charlton Heston. Charlton Heston wasn't just cast as larger-than-life heroes, he lived like one. Before he commanded the screen in biblical epics and classic war films, Heston earned his toughness the hard way, flying through combat zones as a World War II aerial gunner. No PR stunts, no Hollywood fluff, just high-altitude danger and real courage under fire. Though famously humble about his service, Heston once gave a glimpse into the fear he faced. When you're in a B-25 at 15,000 feet and people are shooting at you, it tends to focus the mind wonderfully. That kind of pressure forged a man who would later demand more from himself on movie sets than most would dare. During the grueling shoot for the 10 Commandments, Heston endured blistering heat in Egypt's Sinai desert. While much of the crew collapsed from exhaustion, he pushed through without complaint. And in Ben-Hur, where other actors would have gladly let a stunt double take the reins, Heston trained for months to master the chariot. He suffered injuries. He nearly fell during the iconic race, but he kept going and made cinema history in the process. Director William Wyler, not known for exaggeration, once said, "Chuck has a physical courage that's quite remarkable." Coming from a man who had worked with the biggest names in film, that wasn't just praise, it was a statement of fact. Heston's dedication to authenticity didn't stop at action scenes. In the agony and the ecstasy, portraying Michelangelo meant hours with his arms held aloft, recreating the Sistine Chapel ceiling. The pain was real, the inflammation was severe, but when offered rest or padding between takes, Heston refused. The discomfort, he believed, would fuel a more truthful performance. Actress Sophia Loren, who shared the screen with him in El Cid, described him best. Charlton would spend all day in a 70-pound suit of armor in the Spanish summer heat. When most actors could barely manage an hour, he never complained. There was something almost inhuman about his endurance. Yet it wasn't just his body that was resilient, his convictions were too. Whether marching beside Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or later becoming a polarizing figure in American politics, Heston stood his ground. He didn't chase popularity, he chased principle. In an industry where Hollywood gossip often masks the truth, Heston's strength, physical and moral, set him apart. Director Franklin J. Schaffner, who worked with him on Planet of the Apes, put it simply, many actors play heroes. Chuck actually was one. Harrison Hardbody Norris had the look of a wrestling legend and the discipline of a military man. But behind the scenes, his life was far darker than the spotlight ever revealed. In 2005, whispers began circling around Georgia. Local police were tipped off that something wasn't right at Norris's home. What they found was worse than anything they expected. Multiple women allegedly trapped inside his property and living under his control. When the FBI got involved, things escalated fast. They raided both of Norris's houses and confirmed the worst. 8 women, all claiming they'd been manipulated, isolated, and forced to follow strict rules. The details were grim, the accusations even worse. But due to platform policy, we'll just say it was enough to spark a national frenzy of Hollywood gossip around the former wrestler. In October 2005, Norris was arrested. But in a bizarre twist, he refused a lawyer. That's right, he went to trial alone, defending himself in front of a federal jury. With zero legal experience, he tried to claim it was all just wrestling boot camp gone misunderstood. But the testimony told a different story. One woman described a list of commandments they were forced to follow. Others said Norris kept them in debt, punished them financially, and made sure they couldn't leave. And the jury didn't hesitate. In 2008, Harrison Hardbody Norris was sentenced to life in prison. No parole, no comeback. From promising coach to inmate for life, his downfall wasn't just a scandal. It was a warning. Tammy Sunny Sitch. At one point, Tammy Sunny Sitch was considered the original WWE diva, glamorous, loud, and impossible to ignore. But what started as a glittering career in the ring spiraled into one of the most tragic Hollywood scandals in wrestling history. In 2022, Tammy was involved in a devastating car crash while speeding through Florida in her Mercedes-Benz. She collided full force into the back of a stopped Kia Sorento at a traffic light. The crash was so violent the driver of the other vehicle didn't survive. Police arrived on the scene and rushed Tammy to the hospital, where blood tests told the rest of the story. Her blood alcohol level, more than 3 times the legal limit. It was clear she'd been behind the wheel while heavily impaired. By May 2022, Tammy was officially arrested. The charges? Driving under the influence and causing a fatal incident. She initially posted bail, more than $200,000. But freedom didn't last long. Less than a week later, the judge yanked her bail, calling her a danger to the community. Now Tammy Sitch sits behind bars, awaiting trial. If convicted, she could face decades in prison. Once a wrestling icon, now a cautionary tale, her story is a stark reminder of how fast it can all fall apart. Before we move on, tell us, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, and let's see how far the wrestling world really Eugene Mark Zumhofe. Once known as the king of rock and roll in the wrestling world, Eugene "Buck" Zumhofe had a flashy persona and a devoted fan base. But his reputation would soon come crashing down in one of the most disturbing scandals ever to hit pro wrestling. In May 2013, authorities arrested Zumhofe on multiple felony charges tied to deeply inappropriate behavior. What stunned everyone even more was that these accusations involved his own daughter. A trial was scheduled quickly, and the courtroom would soon become the stage for one of wrestling's darkest chapters. During the trial, Zumhofe's daughter took the stand. Her testimony was powerful, specific, and left the jury in no doubt. One by one, the charges stuck. He was found guilty on all 12 felony counts, but the drama didn't end there. As soon as the verdict was read, Zumhofe made a desperate move. In a moment of chaos, he tried to flee the courthouse, sprinting down the hall, past security, hoping to vanish before being taken into custody. It didn't work. He was tackled and arrested again, this time for attempting to escape. The judge did not go easy on him. With no hesitation, Zumhofe was handed 25 years in prison, a sentence that will keep him locked up until he turns 80. The defense claimed the punishment was excessive, but the court disagreed. "This is an extreme sentence," the judge said. But Mr. Zumhofe's actions were nothing less than extreme. Beaches. Patrick Velveteen Dream Clark. Patrick Clark, better known in the ring as Velveteen Dream, had a promising future in WWE, but in 2022, that future took a sharp and shocking turn, not in the ring, but at his local gym. It all started with a simple request. A gym employee asked Patrick to clear out of a section scheduled for cleaning, but instead of cooperating, Patrick exploded. Witnesses say he refused to leave, began shouting, and when asked to exit the facility entirely, things got physical. Patrick didn't just argue, he allegedly threatened the employee's life, then punched him in the face, sparking a violent brawl. By the time police arrived, both men were bruised, but one detail stood out: bite marks. According to the victim, Patrick bit him during the fight, a disturbing twist that led to Clark's arrest on first-degree battery charges. He was jailed in August 2022 but posted $1,200 bail soon after. Still, trouble followed. Patrick skipped his court appearance, having his attorney file a not guilty plea on his behalf. At the same time, he went public online, declaring his innocence and firing back at the critics. But behind the scenes, his legal troubles only deepened. In September, he was found guilty of violating probation related to an earlier arrest, leading to even more jail time. As the news broke, WWE issued a firm statement. Patrick Clark would not be returning. Between his criminal history and Hollywood gossip linking him to past controversies, his career looks all but over. Brian D.T. Porter McGee. Brian McGee, once known in the ring as D.T. Porter, went from wrestling fame to a chilling downfall that shocked even those familiar with Hollywood scandals. In July 2013, everything unraveled. Outside his Florida apartment, McGee unleashed a violent outburst on his girlfriend. By the time police arrived, it was already too late, and the scene was as disturbing as the digital trail he left behind. Just minutes after the attack, McGee took to social media, making cryptic posts that sounded more like bragging than remorse. When officers reached the scene, they discovered the woman's body, but McGee was already on the run. His attempted escape didn't last long. After crashing his vehicle during a police chase, he was taken into custody and hospitalized. Once cleared medically, authorities charged him with first-degree unlawful killing. His first court appearance made headlines. McGee's legal team asked for bail, but the judge immediately shut it down. Given the severity of the crime and the reckless social media posts, the court ruled he'd remain behind bars until trial. That trial dragged on for nearly 3 years. Finally, in July 2016, the jury handed down a guilty verdict, and the judge didn't hold back. McGee was sentenced to life in prison without parole, the harshest punishment allowed. Life means life, the judge declared. And for Brian McGee, that sentence is now his permanent reality. But this story gets even darker. Despite his conviction, reports later revealed McGee somehow received nearly $50,000 from the Mississippi government. Why? That's a mystery in itself. And trust us, if you thought this was wild, the next name on our list takes things to a whole new level. Comment 10 if you're watching to the end, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more untold WWE stories. Cain Velasquez. Cain Velasquez was taken into custody for attempted murder after a dramatic incident in California, and what he's been through since has left fans stunned. Witnesses say the situation unfolded while Cain was driving. He spotted a man named Harry Goulart Jr. in another car, and something inside him snapped. Goulart had been accused of crossing boundaries with Cain's underage relative. Though Harry was facing charges, he hadn't been locked up. That's when Cain decided to act. He followed the car, locked eyes with Goulart, and a high-speed chase began, lasting more than 11 miles. Cain eventually caught up, rammed the car, and fired several shots. But instead of Goulart, the bullet struck his father. The older man was badly hurt but eventually recovered. Cain was arrested on the spot and hit with multiple charges, including attempted murder and weapons violations. His legal team fought hard to get him out, but 3 bail requests were denied. Authorities said he was a danger to the public, and still Cain's lawyers pushed back, submitting over 30 letters from the WWE community and even testimony from the minor involved. It wasn't enough to convince the judge at first, but they didn't stop there. They took the case to the 6th District Court of Appeals. In September 2022, Cain pleaded not guilty to all charges, and by November the court finally granted bail, at a steep $1 million. Cain paid and walked out of jail after months behind bars, but he wasn't free just yet. House arrest was part of the deal. Despite the restrictions, Cain was granted permission to attend Lucha Libre AAA worldwide in December 2022, a major wrestling event. With police escorting him there, he stepped back into the ring and the crowd erupted with applause. To many, Cain's actions weren't just emotional, they were honorable. Even now, his case is far from over, but in a world full of Hollywood scandals, Cain's story stands out, not just for what happened, but for why it happened. Do you think Cain was defending what mattered most, or did he go too far? Rate it from 1 to 10 in the comments. Let's hear what you think. Ken Wayne. Ken Wayne, known in the ring as Nightmare, became the center of one of the most unsettling Hollywood scandals ever linked to a former WWE star. In September 2014, authorities received a disturbing tip and executed a search warrant on Ken's home in Mississippi. What they uncovered on his personal computer was enough to make headlines and end his freedom. He was arrested and charged with possession of unlawful digital content related to minors. Originally, Ken faced 20 years in prison, a sentence that could have kept him locked up into old age. But in a controversial turn, the prosecution struck a deal. In February 2016, Ken pleaded guilty. In exchange, his prison time was reduced to just 5 years, with the remaining sentence to be served under strict house arrest. On top of that, he was ordered to pay restitution to non-profit organizations and was placed on the state's offender registry. As of today, Ken Wayne remains under house arrest, stripped of his career and legacy. Once known for his intensity in the ring, his name is now a permanent stain in wrestling history. Teddy Hart. Born into the legendary Hart wrestling family, Teddy Hart had every opportunity to become a WWE icon. But instead of making headlines for championship belts, he's now known for a pattern of arrests that has landed him behind bars once again. It started in October 2020 when Teddy was living in Texas. He was arrested and charged with harming a disabled person, evading arrest, and possession of a banned substance. Authorities didn't mince words, they labeled him a fugitive from justice as far back as May of that year. Despite the severity of the charges, the court handed him a surprisingly light sentence. Just 10 days in county jail, but that wouldn't be the end of his run-ins with the law. Barely a year later, in February 2021, Teddy was arrested again, this time in Virginia. The charges, nearly identical: possession of a banned substance and more legal chaos. Court records didn't reveal the specifics, but the pattern was clear. While fans once hoped for his redemption, Teddy's name now surfaces more in celebrity interviews and police reports than in wrestling circles. With a record that keeps growing, Teddy Hart's story feels less like a comeback and more like a permanent sentence. Brett DiBiase. Brett DiBiase, son of wrestling legend Ted DiBiase, is no stranger to the spotlight. But in 2022, his name became tied to something far darker: the largest public embezzlement scandal in Mississippi history. Authorities revealed that over $5 million from the state's welfare fund, money meant to help struggling families, was instead funneled into the hands of celebrities, insiders, and government elites. Among them, Brett DiBiase, who walked away with nearly $50,000. Officially, the funds were tied to a contract for public service work, but Brett confessed in court that he never even began the job. In truth, the money funded a luxury rehab stay, and the rest went straight to his account. That alone would have been scandalous enough. But prosecutors dug deeper. They discovered Brett had submitted forged documents, staged fake events, and even faked teaching a class on drug awareness, a class that never actually happened. As damaging as the evidence was, Brett had one key advantage: he knew everything, and the prosecution wanted that information. To avoid harsh sentencing, Brett agreed to cooperate. In return, authorities postponed his trial and allowed him to help build their case against the major players behind the fraud. He also agreed to pay $5,000 in restitution to victims of the scandal. Today, Brett is still in custody, but his future hangs in the balance. While awaiting sentencing, he's helped secure convictions for several of the scheme's ringleaders. His cooperation could change his fate. This case shocked the nation, not just for the money stolen, but for the celebrities and officials it dragged into the spotlight. And though Brett DiBiase may never be known for his matches in the ring, he's now a central figure in one of Mississippi's most talked about political crimes. You won't hear this kind of truth in most celebrity interviews, but behind the fame, sometimes corruption runs deeper than anyone expected. Devin Hannibal Nicholson. Canadian wrestler Devin Nicholson, better known to fans as Hannibal, found himself back in legal trouble in August 2022. This time he was arrested and charged in connection with a physical altercation following an alleged attack on a woman. And if the past is anything to go by, this wasn't his first brush with controversy. Just a year earlier, in December 2021, Devin made headlines for all the wrong reasons when he reportedly injured a WWE referee with a foreign object during an event. The incident left the referee with serious injuries and forced him to launch a GoFundMe campaign just to cover his medical bills. The wrestling community was shaken, and Devin's reputation took a massive hit. Now, with fresh charges hanging over him, Devin is once again in the spotlight, but not the kind any wrestler wants. Canadian authorities have kept him under close watch as he awaits trial. If found guilty, he could be looking at several years behind bars. His case has sparked heated Hollywood gossip circles and left fans divided. Was this a one-time loss of control, or part of a pattern too serious to ignore? Only the court can decide, but the damage to his legacy may already be done. What do you think? Is Devin Hannibal's story one of downfall or just destruction? Let us know in the comments. Billy Jack Haynes. Once a towering force in the wrestling ring during the golden age of WWF, Billy Jack Haynes is now making headlines for all the wrong reasons. In early 2024, a shocking incident turned this former superstar into the center of a real-life nightmare. Police were called to his home in Portland, Oregon after reports of violence. Inside, they discovered his wife, Jeanette Beecraft, dead from a gunshot wound. What followed was a tense standoff, armed, volatile, and unpredictable. Eventually, Haynes surrendered and was taken into custody without further incident. Now facing charges including second-degree homicide and illegal possession of a firearm, Haynes sits behind bars awaiting trial. The wrestling world was stunned. For a man who once battled Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania, this descent into darkness feels like a page torn from the most tragic of Hollywood scandals. Daniel Rodimer. Daniel Rodimer once stepped out of the wrestling ring and into the political spotlight, even running for Congress. But in a twist darker than any wrestling storyline, Rodimer is now facing one of the most serious accusations imaginable. In October 2023, Rodimer was charged following the tragic death of Christopher Tapp at a Halloween party in Las Vegas. Tapp's story was already known across the nation. He had spent years behind bars for a crime he didn't commit, only to be exonerated later. But just when it seemed his life had turned around, it ended in a violent confrontation that allegedly involved Rodimer. Authorities claim the altercation began after Tapp reportedly offered something inappropriate to Rodimer's stepdaughter, sparking a deadly response. Rodimer later surrendered to police and was released on a $200,000 bond. But the charges still hang heavy, and the trial could determine the rest of his life. This shocking fall from grace isn't just another entry in Hollywood scandals. It's a chilling reminder that fame and fury are a dangerous mix. Buff Bagwell. Buff Bagwell once embodied the glitz and bravado of professional wrestling's golden era. As a five-time WCW Tag Team Champion and a prominent member of the NWO, he was the epitome of 90s wrestling charisma. However, his life outside the ring has been marred by a series of legal troubles and personal challenges. In 2021, Bagwell faced multiple misdemeanor charges in Cobb County, Georgia, including driving under the influence, reckless driving, and providing false information to law enforcement. These incidents marked the beginning of a tumultuous period for the former wrestling star. Despite efforts to turn his life around, including seeking assistance from fellow wrestler Diamond Dallas Page, Bagwell's struggles persisted. In November 2023, he was arrested again for a misdemeanor charge of speeding and driving under the influence of drugs. This arrest occurred during a court hearing related to his DUI drug court program, highlighting ongoing issues with compliance. Bagwell has publicly acknowledged his challenges, stating, "I did serve 24 hours for losing my temper, and I'm working on keeping my cool every day." He has emphasized his commitment to sobriety, asserting that recent violations were not due to relapse, but rather breaches of program rules. As of early 2025, Bagwell continues to navigate the consequences of his past actions, including serving brief jail sanctions for program violations. His journey underscores the complexities of personal redemption and the enduring impact of one's choices. Michael Droz. Michael Droz, once known to WWE fans as Duke the Dumpster Droz, made his name in the 90s with grit, gloves, and garbage can props. But decades later, he's no longer battling opponents in the ring. He's facing federal charges that could bury his legacy forever. In May 2025, a Warren County grand jury indicted Druzy after investigators accused him of trying to access disturbing material through the dark web. The allegations were enough to land him in federal custody, where he now awaits trial behind bars. The case has sent shockwaves through both the wrestling world and beyond, reigniting conversations around privacy, internet crime, and the hidden lives of public figures. It's the kind of story that turns heads in celebrity interviews. Not for what's said, but for what's revealed. For a man who once played a blue-collar hero, Droz's real-life storyline is now playing out in the cold, unforgiving reality of a courtroom. Blickley. Jeff Hardy. Jeff Hardy was once the fearless high flyer who defied gravity and captivated millions. But outside the ring, his real battle was far more dangerous and far more personal. By the late 2000s, Hardy's downward spiral was no secret. In 2009, during one of his lowest points, he was arrested after authorities discovered a stash of restricted substances. A year later, Hardy didn't fight the charges. He admitted guilt and accepted the consequences. His sentence, 30 months in total, but only 10 of those were served behind bars. The rest played out under strict probation, a chance to reset, but only on paper. Fast forward a decade and history seemed to echo. Hardy was arrested again, this time for public intoxication. While it didn't land him back in serious legal trouble, it reignited concern about his long-running struggles. From wrestling legend to courtroom headlines, Jeff Hardy's story is more than just a cautionary tale. It's a real-life chapter in the world of Hollywood scandals that fans never saw coming. Kyle Snyder. Kyle Snyder once stood atop the world as an Olympic wrestling champion, an American hero known for discipline, strength, and unshakable focus. But in May 2025, headlines told a very different story. Snyder was caught in the middle of an anti-prostitution sting operation in Columbus, Ohio. Authorities say he contacted an undercover officer and allegedly offered money in exchange for inappropriate services. Though he wasn't taken into custody, he was cited at the scene and now faces a court appearance scheduled for May 19th. The revelation stunned fans and cast a shadow over a once sterling legacy. From gold medals to courtroom summons, the fall was fast and unexpected, fueling new waves of speculation across celebrity interviews and social platforms. As Snyder prepares to face the judge, the world watches, wondering how a figure of such discipline could stumble so publicly. Stone Cold Steve Austin. He smashed beers, raised hell, and ruled the ring like no other. But in 2002, Stone Cold Steve Austin's name made headlines for a reason no one saw coming. That year, his ex-wife, Deborah Marshall, came forward with serious accusations that led to Austin's arrest. The story stunned fans around the world and cast a long shadow over the legend's legacy. While Austin continued to appear in public and even gave a few celebrity interviews, the controversy never truly left him. Behind the larger-than-life persona was a personal life that spiraled into scandal, one that fans still whisper about today. WWE's toughest rebel met a reality he couldn't stun, his own reputation cracking in the face of a moment he couldn't walk away from. Chris Jericho. Chris Jericho has built a career as one of the most charismatic and unpredictable figures in wrestling history. But even the best can find themselves in headlines for all the wrong reasons. In 2010, while touring with WWE in Kentucky, Jericho's night took a wild turn. He was arrested after a public disturbance outside a bar, a moment that caught fans completely off guard. Police reports describe both Jericho and a fellow wrestler as being out of control in public. He was quickly taken into custody and spent a short time behind bars. Though the incident didn't lead to major jail time, it made one thing clear: Jericho's off-screen persona could be just as chaotic as his in-ring theatrics. Since then, he's worked hard to reshape his image through podcasts, rock concerts, and high-profile celebrity interviews. But that one night remains a footnote that fans haven't forgotten. From world titles to mugshots, Jericho's journey proves that fame can flip in an instant. Jimmy Snuka. Jimmy Superfly Snuka was a trailblazer in professional wrestling, an icon whose high-flying moves inspired an entire generation. But behind the fame, a dark and controversial chapter unraveled years after his peak. Back in 1983, the wrestling world was shaken by the mysterious death of Snuka's girlfriend. At the time, the case was ruled accidental. But decades later, in 2015, the story resurfaced, this time with serious consequences. Authorities reopened the case and Snuka was charged in connection to her death. By then, he was in declining health and struggling to stand trial. The legal battle was cut short when a judge ruled that Snuka was mentally unfit to proceed. He passed away just a year later in 2017, leaving behind a legacy that remains as complicated as it is iconic. While fans once saw him as a hero, whispers of this unresolved case continue to circle, an example of Hollywood gossip colliding with wrestling's golden era. Scott Hall. Scott Hall, famously known as Razor Ramon, lived a life as wild as his wrestling persona. But behind the iconic swagger was a man spiraling through chaos. In 2010, Hall was arrested at a Florida bar after an explosive incident involving aggressive behavior and public disorder. Just a year later, he turned himself in for a previous charge, marking yet another entry in a long line of off-screen struggles. His name became as synonymous with arrests as it was with championships. Hall's long, painful battle with addiction played out publicly, casting a haunting shadow over his larger-than-life career. Though he passed away in 2022, his legacy remains a blend of triumph and tragedy, one of wrestling's brightest stars dimmed by personal demons. His story stands among the most heartbreaking Hollywood scandals ever tied to the world of professional wrestling. Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle isn't just a wrestling legend, he's an Olympic hero. But even gold medalists can fall hard, and Angle's post-ring life has been marred by a series of alarming incidents behind the wheel. Over the years, Angle faced multiple arrests across different states, all tied to driving under the influence. Each time, headlines followed, and fans watched in disbelief as their once invincible idol became a cautionary tale. Despite the setbacks, Angel's story didn't end there. He's since taken steps to reclaim his life and image, opening up about his struggles in raw celebrity interviews and public statements. But the scars from those encounters with the law still linger. Kurt Angle went from standing on Olympic podiums to sitting in police stations. And it's a fall from grace the wrestling world won't soon forget. Ric Flair. Ric Flair wasn't just a wrestling icon, he was a walking spectacle of style, swagger, and chaos. But in 2005, the Nature Boy made headlines for all the wrong reasons when his fiery temper followed him off the stage and onto the streets. During a heated road rage incident, Flair allegedly grabbed another driver by the neck and even damaged their vehicle in a fit of fury. Police took the situation seriously, and legal action quickly followed. Though the case didn't lead to serious jail time, it became yet another controversial moment in Flair's already wild legacy, a reminder that the drama didn't stop when the cameras turned off. From championship belts to courtroom appearances, Ric Flair's life has blurred the line between legend and scandal, a real-life episode straight out of Hollywood gossip. That wraps up our deep dive into Hollywood's legitimately toughest actors, men whose real-life grit carved legends the golden era of cinema still worships today. If this trip through their untamed stories fired up your nostalgia, smash that like button and subscribe for more hidden gems from classic film history. Now I'm dying to know, which of these tough guys impressed you the most and why? Drop your take in the comments. Your voice keeps these legendary conversations alive.